In this presentation, I'm going to discuss data analysis for qualitative research. As the Creswell chapter discusses, there's a lot of different ways that qualitative researchers approach data analysis. So in this presentation, I'm going to give you some basic tips and principles for qualitative data analysis, drawing from my own experience and the readings. However, I want you to realize that other than what I'm offering, there are certainly other valid best practices taken by different people. So you can certainly identify other research method books or resources, and you can learn different and useful techniques from those sources in the process of conducting qualitative data analysis. The process of qualitative data analysis is different from quantitative analysis in several ways. Simply put, of course, as we discussed already thousands of times, the nature of the data is different. So quantitative data deals with numerically documented data, whereas qualitative data deals with words. However, there is also difference in the process itself between the two methodological approaches. In quantitative research, data collection and analysis is more of a linear process. So you will collect data first, and you don't start analyzing your data before you're done collecting it. For instance, you send out a survey and you just have 7 responses back at the moment. If you decide to have at least 20 respondents in your data before you sent out the survey, you wouldn't start running any analysis when you get back 7 people. Of course, you can start analyzing the first 7 you have, but you have to update the analysis as you have the rest of 13. So you will wait until you have the full 20 responses and then putting the responses to a data format like the one that we practiced in the class 2 weeks ago. Once your data is formatted, then you will start analyzing your data using statistics such as mean, standard deviation, frequency distribution, as well as applicable bivariate statistics. Qualitative research, however, is different. As Creswell discussed, the idea of analytic induction, qualitative data analysis is not a linear process, and your data analysis starts when you are collecting the data. Let's say you propose to conduct at least 5 to 6 interviews. You then actually conduct maybe 1 or 2 interviews. Immediately, you will start analyzing your data to see what themes seem to be emerging. You might then change your data collection procedures based on this interim or preliminary analysis as well. One of the things that I want to mention is the idea of memoing. As a researcher, you should be keeping a journal as you are collecting your data. Basically, you will be taking notes as to see how your research questions being answered as your data collection is in progress. And then at the end of the process, you go back to your memos to see your reflections, thoughts, and insights that you had during the data collection and analysis processes. Finally, you can start collecting data when you reach the point of saturation. I briefly discussed this concept in my last presentation. Basically, the idea is that you will collect your data and analyze them right away, and as you see no new things emerge from your data, then you decide, okay, there's no need for more data. No more interviews, focus groups, documents, or observations. Okay. So to give you an example of the process of data analysis in qualitative research, I will employ a study conducted by Lim and Paivis in 2012 on college science lecturers' experience with dealing with curriculum reform at junior colleges in Singapore, which are equivalent of community colleges in the United States. Taking a grounded theory approach, the researchers tried to understand and theoretically explain what the lecturers go through under the curriculum reform. If you read the full paper, uploaded to the supplemental resources folder in the course Blackboard, the authors actually provide really detailed information about the setting. The sample was science teachers teaching in the community colleges. The researchers employed a maximum variation sampling in order to have variation in teaching subjects, gender, and years of teaching experiences among their sample. The data collection method was semi-structured interview along with classroom observations and teachers' record books. The authors also included secondary sources of data such as official records and public documents. In terms of their interview, the study had 5 aims, and the researchers developed about 3 guiding questions for their interview for each of those research purposes. Okay, so after data collection, technically, qualitative researchers will transcribe them. Essentially, they can turn their interviews or observational notes and memos, everything like that, into text. The whole idea behind doing this is that data is now in a more usable form, and it's easier to analyze it when the data is in front of you in the form of text. Typically, researchers use qualitative data analysis computer program, and you have to import the data to the program in text form. Those of you who are planning to do interviews for your qualitative research project, you should consider transcribing the data. I know it seems like a huge pain and it might take a long time to complete it, but once you have it, it's much more usable than if you're trying to catch themes that are emerging from just audio files. Also, there are different approaches to the coding. First of all, you can go through your transcription of your data line by line, and you come up with codes. This is what is referred as inductive coding. Occasionally, researchers will come to their study with what's called a priori codes. You can employ this approach if you have an idea of the codes that you are going to be looking for, or you already have a developed master list of codes at your hand. But typically, most researchers follow an inductive coding rather than a priori coding. Another point is that you should not think that each segment of your data will only have one code. There could be cases where one piece of data or one segment of data can be coded with multiple different codes. This is what's called co-occurring codes. So when you are reading a participant's responses and see some parts fits with several ideas, then it can be captured with more than one code. Next, we will review the 3 sorts of steps when you go about coding, especially from grounded theory perspective. I'll walk you through some technical terms, and hopefully with the examples, you'll have a bit clearer understanding about the steps of coding process. So the first step is open coding. This is basically what I described as coding in the previous slides. Basically, you just go through your transcripts line by line and you find concepts that emerge from your data, summarize these segments into conceptual codes. So open coding is very much descriptive. Let's take a look at the example study. The authors provided their transcript from an interview they conducted with the teacher/participant. If you were the researchers, you will read the transcript line by line. Now, as the first step, open coding, you will see if there is any concept relevant to your study topic emerges. For example, the teacher is saying that with regard to teaching to students with different academic background is more difficult. So here we see that the theme is teaching difficulty, so I will write that down, that concept in my coding list. Then, as we continue reading, the participant is also describing that we are aware of their prior knowledge before teaching and have to take extra effort, pitch our lessons accordingly, blah, blah, blah. So this description kind of presents a new segment, which is how teachers address the situation, what they do for effective teaching, and perhaps increased workload. So you will add those concepts to your coding. So you repeat this process for the entire transcript for every single piece of data, in this case, interviews with all participants, and come up with the list of coding. After you're done open coding, now you will start looking for the patterns across those codes. That's the idea of Axial and selected coding. We will go through the examples in the upcoming slides, but basically the idea is that you first start by open coding, and then you go to Axial coding and see how your codes are related to one another. So essentially, Axial code is summarizing and making sense of your results. One helpful tip that you can use when you go to Axial coding is enumerating codes. That is basically you quantifying your data. You will count the times a word appears in a document, or you count the number of times a code or a category is used. As a researcher, as well as an audience, you can take this information. So frequency or quantity of how many times different codes emerged in your data. This can tell you what concept you might emphasize in your analysis and discussion. For example, let's say you studied experiences of female students in STEM majors. We found that the concept identification came out 6 times and stereotype came out 12 times. So then you can highlight stereotype-related discussions compared to that of identification. The other tip for Axial coding in relation to your search for relationships among your code is to find hierarchies and use diagrams. Codes may be placed in hierarchies. This means that you are organizing your codes into levels or defining their relationships. On the bottom of the screen, you will see a table with several different types of hierarchies, relationships that codes might take. One of the common hierarchies is strict inclusion, and this is when a code is always kind of another. For example, you are conducting a study of students' academic experiences. You go through your data and find 2 codes, one learning communities and another code academic integration. So between the 2 codes, you find that learning communities is actually a kind of academic integration. So these 2 codes, you can conclude to have a strict inclusion relationship. Another relationship that we might often identify is cause and effect, number 3 in the table. So now, let's say you find another code, which is sense of belonging, emerged as common theme. Then you will think that academic integration might cause sense of belonging, and you will try to get at those relationships among your codes. So what I really like to do as part of Axial coding is diagramming relationships among codes. Visualization is a good option to move forward the qualitative data analysis. Once you identified your codes from open coding, you will start making a sketch or drawing or some kind of outline to show how something's working, the process that you are observing, or to clarify the relationships between parts of a whole. In the example here, the authors of the community or junior college study identified 9 dimensions that are now captured in each box from their open coding. They also added related themes to those codes that emerged from the data. You will see that the arrows are showing what the researchers see as the relationships between the concepts. They also added words that specified hierarchies between the concepts on the arrow. In addition to the diagram, you will also explain in text what main themes emerged and what the relationships between those codes are. In this example, the authors describe what the new curriculum brought to lecturers' teaching, focusing on the code's customization of teaching, personalized learning from other teachers. So basically, this is more of a memo for yourself, and it's not necessarily going to make to your final paper or report. And finally, selective coding is identifying main ideas or essence from your coding that answer your research questions. In the article that we used as an example, the authors now even more simplify the themes and relationships between them, really focusing on how curriculum reform has influenced teachers, particularly in terms of teaching and learning. So now the final selective coding explains how concerns regarding teaching and learning of the revised curriculum resulted in strategies that teachers adopt with different purposes and emphasis on individualization or personalization. Based on the selective coding, you will need to provide a final synopsis, which addresses important dimensions or main ideas/conclusions from the coding. You will notice that in the selected coding, there is no direct quotes from the data, but synthesized results and overall meaning of them are provided by the researchers in their final paper. Likewise, what we discussed for quantitative research, qualitative data analysis can also employ computer programs. Cresswell sort of describes those programs in his chapter, and I also shared a short demo of NVivo program in the supplementary folder of the course Blackboard, so you may take a look at it if you are interested. NVivo might be the one that is more often used, and I've also used NVivo for my research, but the other ones are just as good and useful as NVivo. As I mentioned before, you don't have to use those programs for your capstone project, and it is likely the case that you will use simple programs such as Word or Excel for your analysis. However, I just wanted to let you know that those programs are available and they become helpful when you have to engage in a big qualitative study where you have big data from different sources, such as lots of interview transcripts, observational data, video data, and documents. Those programs will help you keeping track of and organizing those various data you have to manage. Finally, I would like to talk about the idea of reliability and validity in qualitative study compared to quantitative approach. So oftentimes, people critique research design considering reliability and validity as the two key quality aspects. Particularly for quantitative study, reliability is if the design can be replicated and you will have the same results when you replicate a study. Or it also refers to the consistency in your findings when you have multiple observations on the same case or on the same dimension. Meanwhile, validity in quantitative study means whether your measurement is measuring what it intends to measure. So the key is a good alignment between the key constructs, variables, and measurements. Now, in qualitative studies, researchers don't really think about the idea of reliability and validity and study strength in the same way as quantitative researchers do. Again, this sort of goes back to their different philosophy of knowledge. A lot of qualitative researchers reject the frame of reliability and validity. Whether terms such as dependability, trustworthiness, credibility, applicability, or transferability are used. One important thing that you have to mention in your proposal is who is going to code the data and his or her or their relevance to the data. Although you will be the only one who will analyze the data for your project this time, having multiple coders strengthens your design of the study. The idea behind it is getting reliability across coders. For example, if you code something as academic integrity, your colleagues who are coding on the same project should also code the same segment as academic integrity. This is the idea of inter-coder reliability or consistency across coders. Meanwhile, the idea of intra-coder reliability or consistency is that you as a single coder is approaching the data the same way and you are seeing patterns of segments that are consistent. For example, if you code any descriptions about the use of computer in classroom as technology, You should be consistent in doing that across all pieces of data that you are coding. Also, another important aspect that makes your qualitative study strong is corroborating and validating your overall findings. You will also need to make sure that you are being trustworthy in terms of what you are presenting. In terms of the idea of avoiding bias, although it is impossible to totally exclude bias, it's just really important to be upfront and honest about your positionality in what you did in the study. The more information you give, the stronger your study is. This table has a couple of specific strategies that qualitative researchers typically use to strengthen their studies, in addition to the idea of acknowledging your own positionality and being really upfront about how you're approaching the topic. What I want to emphasize or highlight here is the idea of triangulation. So triangulation is essentially drawing from multiple different sources to support your vision. For example, instead of just doing one interview, you can use multiple interviews or multiple data sources to back up and validate themes that have emerged in your analysis. So maybe you are doing some interviews of graduate students about their perceptions of higher education program policies and procedures, and maybe you find that students tend to complain about the policy that students are not allowed to finish their program in 1 year. So after your interviews, or like during your analysis procedure, you then go to some documents such as program handbooks and see how the policy around the graduation requirements and time to degree are presented by the program. In your data analysis section, you might explain that you will triangulate your findings that you got from your interviews with the policy and procedures explained on the program manual. Sometimes you can't do that, but a lot of times at least you can triangulate across multiple interview participants or respondents. So this presentation has come to an end, and I hope that the idea of qualitative data analysis makes a little bit more sense by now. In class, we will have a Q&A time for this lecture content, followed by an activity for qualitative data analysis with mock interview transcripts. As we reach to the final discussion of research design, we will spend some time on what makes good research design and description of it in your proposal using actual examples. We will continue workshopping your qualitative design as well. I look forward to seeing you all in class.